up breathing this morning. It hurts, but still at least there's pain. My feet were flying off the pavement. I turned down Fillmore Street again. I think I'm on to something, baby.
Hello, and welcome to the Association of International Product Management and Marketing webinar series. Today we are discussing Measure or Die, Data-Informed Product Management, a Yammer case study with two product people from Yammer. This is Cindy Faye Solomon.
Hello, this is Neil McCarthy.
And this is Ken Pascual.
We're all here in the studio with BZ Lewis to give you this live presentation as part of the AIPMM webinar series. And so please use the questions box to ask questions and to make comments, and I will interact with you in the questions area and also use those questions during the Q&A. Please stay on until the end when we will do a drawing for the Product Management and Marketing Body of Knowledge, the ProdBoK, that was put together by the AIPMM and 60 contributors about product management, the 7 phases, and everything you need to know to become certified. The AIPMM is a worldwide certifying body of product managers, product marketers, agile product managers, innovation leaders, and brand managers. So I am Cindy F. Solomon. I'm the host of the Global Product Management Talk. I'm delighted to have Neil McCarthy, who's a product manager at Yammer, and Ken Pascual, who's a data analyst, data scientist, here to discuss how they work with data at Yammer. And they're going to give us a very specific case study. They did give us background readings to read ahead of time, but they are also posted for you to read afterwards. And I invite you to participate fully because they're going to be testing whether we're paying attention with some very specific questions and some polls. So you can follow us on Twitter. Follow the AIPMM at AIPMM, where you can see job opportunities in product management, product marketing, worldwide job opportunities, as well as get updates on upcoming webinars. You can follow Neil at Hard Cornelius, Ken at Vorped, and me at Cindy F. Solomon. On Twitter, use the hashtag pound AIPMM, pound PRODBOK for ProdBoK, and the standard hashtag for product management discussions is pound PRODMGMT. Okay. Great.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Cindy. So just to introduce ourselves again, my name is Neil McCarthy. I'm a product manager at Yammer. I've been on the team for about 3 years, a product manager for 2 of those years, and I got into product management via sales engineering those kind of 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm Kenneth Pascual. I have been at Yammer for about 1.5 years now. Do data stuff amongst other things, not just product analytics, but also looking at other things. So we also look at marketing and so Yammer's also part of Microsoft, so we also help out in terms of other Microsoft teams as well.
Cool. Okay, so before we dive into kind of a detailed case study of how we use data to make decisions at Yammer, I wanted to introduce what Yammer is for those of you who might not have had a chance to use it yet. Yammer is a freemium enterprise social network. So you sign up with your work email address. You land in this kind of social screen. There's a screenshot that we're looking at now with a feed in the middle, and you can start having threaded social conversations and have group-based like social collaboration experiences with your coworkers based on the fact that you all have the same email domain. So you get grouped together in this private social network. Okay, so what are the ways that we use data to make decisions at Yammer? or when do we use data to make decisions at Yammer? We use, I think hopefully I'm still sharing. Okay. So no problem. So we use data to make a lot of different decisions at Yammer, especially around our product management process. One of the things that we spend a lot of time at the beginning of our product management processes for an idea doing is justifying features, and data is incredibly valuable for justifying features. Some people call it data mining, and we just kind of call it our justification step of our process. We'll use data to try to figure out what the impact of a feature is before we decide whether to proceed with even speccing it. And then along the way, as we're speccing it, we're making decisions about how important this feature that we're thinking about is going to be compared to the other things that we can put engineers on to actually execute. So then we also use data to make decisions during the project. So we finish speccing and we get to the point where engineers are actually writing code, and the PM is kind of helping make decisions throughout that process. But a lot of those decisions are best made when you know how your users are actually using the product, especially in the area of the feature that your building is. So, for example, a lot of times, since we don't try to overwrite our spec before we begin, we like to stay flexible. Edge cases that the PM didn't think about will come up during the execution phase of the project, and we'll use data to try to figure out if it's worth building something to address that edge case, or whether there are so few users using the feature that would use the feature in that way that it's not worth addressing the edge case. So we'll use data like that to help make that decision. And then finally, we have a very, as I mentioned, we have a very data-informed product management culture. So one of the things that means is we test everything. So not just funnel features and not just marketing campaigns. We'll A/B test every feature that we launch inside the product to determine its impact on key metrics like engagement and virality. Okay, so at this point, we're going to go through a couple of examples, or really one main example, of a couple of features that were iterations of each other and how we use data to make decisions throughout. So where do we get ideas? This is kind of maybe the least data-informed part of our process, because we start using data after we get all of our ideas to start weeding ideas out. We get ideas from customers who make feature requests. We get ideas from people at Yammer that are using Yammer, so Yammer employees. We get feature requests directly from our users. And of course, we on the product team just have a strong opinion of where we want our product to go. So we're not using data as a really big way to come up with ideas. That is one of the sources of ideas we'll have. We'll see a trend in data and we'll think it'll give us an idea of something to address. But we also have a strong product vision, and you can't use data to replace every piece of creativity that you could possibly apply to the product management process. So what we do use data to do when we're justifying is prioritizing features. So it's important as a product manager to think in terms of the impact of the feature idea that you're working on, whether you thought of it or whether you're assessing a feature idea that came in externally. Because if you ship a feature that's a really small change to a part of the product that very few users use, then your A/B test is going to show that your feature had no impact, and you'll need a really good idea or really good justification to ship a feature like that, because unless it's a strategic feature or prerequisite, something that you need to do something bigger later, there's really no need to ship that impactless feature. Another important thing to think about when you're prioritizing ideas that come in at the top of the funnel, of the ideation funnel, is how much you're going to learn from each one. So there might be a huge idea that's way too big to be just its own project. And we're very, interested in sticking to iterative design. So we like to break big ideas into smaller chunks. And when you're prioritizing one of those smaller chunks against other kind of apples to oranges ideas, it's useful to think about how much you're going to learn from the data and from the user research that you do after the feature's launched. That'll inform whether this iteration or the big idea that this feature is an iteration toward is a good idea, and whether we should proceed or whether we should kind of abandon it and work on something that seems more important. And then finally, I mentioned strategic features just a moment ago. If a feature is going to have a low impact and you may not learn that much, it may be okay to ship it. But really, the only reason I can think of to ship features like that is if it's a feature that makes progress toward a vision that you're committed to, and you should still, even in that case, try to learn as much as you can from that iteration. Okay, so. To set up our case study, I'll talk about a previous experiment that we ran. So we did a feature we looked at our sign-up flow, and we thought, okay, we have basically a 4-step sign-up flow. It's actually 5 steps because it includes an email activation step. And what we noticed is, okay, it's a pretty long sign-up flow compared to other products. So we know that we're probably losing users with each successive step that we add, and each time we ask them to do something, some percentage of users are likely to, not do that thing and just drop off and not make it into the product. So we thought, okay, well, let's simplify our sign-up flow, and instead of asking for a user to join groups as they're signing up or to add a profile photo when they're signing up, they will instead be asked to enter that information after they're already in the product. So they'll do a 2-step sign-up flow and then just get that information in the product. And in order to be diligent, we actually broke this up into a multivariate test with 4 variations. Control, a 3-step sign-up flow where we ask for profile photo, a 3-step sign-up flow where we ask for groups, and then a 2-step sign-up flow, the most frictionless one. And our hypothesis for this was more users will get through the sign-up flow, and then they'll learn about Yammer in Yammer, and so we'll end up with more engaged users. Okay, so of course we're going to A/B test this. I talked about the structure of the test. It's a 4-way multivariate test, and here Ken is going to analyze the results.
Right. So let me talk about what an A/B test means first. So essentially, what we do is, so let's think about the ways you could figure out whether or not a sign-up flow is better or worse. You could just have 2 versions of it and then ask people, or you could use data, right? And so that's why we chose to use data. And so in order to create an A/B test, we create 2 sets of people, or 2 sets of groups, and we put people in each of the groups completely randomly, such that we have basically the same composition of users in each, and then we see what they do. And then we try to measure if what they do is different from each other. Okay, and so here's what it means in numbers. Let's look at the 3rd column of numbers. And you see here that this 3rd column represents the number of users that completed the sign-up funnel. And this is kind of the most obvious way to measure whether or not a sign-up flow is good. And so we have 4 rows here, and each of the rows represents a different experience. And so we have 4 different experiences. We have 25% of people in each of the groups. And then you could see here that the cells in yellow are the ones that did better. And this happens to be 2 particular experiences where you removed steps in a certain way. And so you could conclude just from this that, hey, these are the ones that are better because, you know what? The whole point of the product was to get more people through the sign-up flow and end up at our product. And so that's great. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily care just about whether or not people did the thing that we wanted them to do, which in this case is get through the sign-up flow. Here at Yammer, what we care about is that people stick around later on, right? Like it's useful that people do the thing, but it's more useful that people use us in the long term. And so we have these 2 columns to the left, which we call 1-day new user retention and 7-day new user retention. Essentially, that is a metric that describes whether or not someone stayed on the day after they signed up. And so that's 1-day retention. And we have another metric, 7-day retention, which is did they stay on between the next day, somewhere between the next day and next week. And so that's what we use to basically proxy for whether or not they stayed on 3 months later. And in fact, we've done this analysis and we found that there's a high correlation between whether or not someone stays on tomorrow, and it turns out that a lot of those people end up staying on in the long term. And so that's how we measure results, right? Like this is our metric for what is good in this test. And so you can see that when we look at that particular metric, you see negative numbers here, which means that fewer people ended up sticking around. And so that's a pretty interesting result. And so you might wonder, like, why is that? Okay. So one of the things that we could surmise from that is that when you remove steps from the funnel, it turns out that people do the thing you did because it's easier to do and there's less friction. But you also removed a lot of the reasons why the product was valuable, right? So in our steps, we got rid of things like the suggested groups, which it turns out people use groups to organize their workflow and like to reduce the clutter of their network. And so we helped in the sense that we got more people through, but we hurt in the sense that the product was less valuable because we had fewer signals to make the product valuable later on in their basically their user lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So just to reiterate, our two main theories for why this test failed were, and they're very related, that users were getting more invested in Yammer by going through the sign-up flow steps, and they were understanding Yammer concepts by learning that they existed in the sign-up flow steps, and that since they were giving us more data in the sign-up flow steps, they were getting a more tailored, better experience when they first landed on their Yammer homepage. They were more likely to see relevant threads because they had joined groups and such. So, So before we move on, Ken, I think since we're going to be showing different A/B test results in the future, do you want to talk a little bit about what p-value is and how we use it?
Yeah, sure. So we have two pieces of information here for each of the metric / treatment groups, and we call them lift and p-value. Lift is essentially the difference between that group and the default experience, which we call control, and that's just whatever existed before, right? And so that's basically just the measure of the difference between what currently exists and what we want, what we think could work. And so the p-value is basically a measure of uncertainty. That's the best way of thinking about it. And it's basically a measure of like how possible is it that the difference I see is real. And so the key point here is that you want a small p-value, so one closer to 0, and you definitely don't want something closer to 1, because that essentially means that whatever you're seeing might just be completely random. So that's the biggest takeaway for p-value. We could get more detailed into that, but I think that's pretty much what you need to know.
Great, thank you. Okay, so at this point, you should get a poll asking you. Basically, what the poll is what do you think we should build next? If we're committed to this idea of increasing the throughput of our sign-up flow and increasing the number of engaged users that we get from our sign-up flow, what would you do next? And there are some multiple choice options of some ideas that we had, so you can kind of select which ones you would want to try. But I'll jump into what we did try. So we have a couple of different sign-up flows, just to set it up a little bit. One of them is for organic users, and one of them is for viral users. An organic user is someone that just comes to Yammer.com and puts their email address in. So they find it via a search engine or marketing, like a click-through marketing. And then a viral user is a user that was invited by a different user, either another viral user who was invited themselves or an organic user that came in. So those are the two different sign-up flows that we can try to optimize for. What we looked at is like the amount of friction in the organic sign-up flow is pretty high because it requires you to enter your email address, go to your email inbox, click on a verification email and then go straight into the Yammer signup flow. And then you still have like 4 more steps after that, like switch out, switch back experience before you even see Yammer. So we're thinking, oh yeah, that's really high friction. It's hard to get around though, because since we're an enterprise product and privacy inside of business communications is really important, we need users to verify their email before they can get access to that business data and that feed for their company. Okay, so our idea was to, for organic users, move the check your email step to the end. So you're a user, you hear about Yammer, you go to yammer.com, you enter your email address, then you go through 4 steps of the sign-up flow without having to switch to your email inbox first. You give us all this information that buys you into Yammer and tailors your default experience, and then your last step is to check your email. And then you get into Yammer. So we move our potentially highest friction feature or highest friction step of our organic users sign-up flow to the end. Sounded like a great idea. Okay, so let's go through some due diligence on this feature. We don't just like think of features and then staff them right away. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work to justify features before we commit resources to them, even like PM spec resources. So does this vision or does this feature align with our vision? So our vision for Yammer is for it to be a primary communication tool that helps users get work done and to create more open and connected companies. And yeah, getting more users into Yammer is certainly aligned with that vision, because if we don't have users coming in and engaging with Yammer, then it can't be a primary communication tool. One of our goals at the time, we were very growth oriented at that time, and our overall company goals kind of shift between growth, engagement, and some other key themes as we feel is necessary at the time. At the time of this feature, we were thinking growth was very important for us. So our goal was something like grow the number of users that use the product. So this feature is obviously directly aligned with that goal. And then the problem that we crystallized that we were trying to solve is that we lose too many potential users in our sign-up flow. And we're worried that they never come back once they bounce from the sign-up flow. So we really, really want to optimize that sign-up flow. So how important is this? We used data primarily to kind of create some justification for this feature.
Right. So what you're seeing here is a retention curve. And basically what I wanted to do to figure out here is, if we're going to do an iteration on the sign-up flow, which should we do, the organic one or the viral one? And so if you look at retention, which is essentially how many people stick around as a function of how old they are, it turns out that the blue line is higher than the red line, which means that organic users stick around more on average over time than viral users. And so basically, the thing that we boiled that down to is that it turns out that organic users are, quote, better users for us because they stick around more. And so optimizing the experience so that we make the experience better for those kinds of people might actually be a bigger win than having the viral users. All right. And so another thing that we did was we looked at our actual funnel and saw where the drops occurred. So we have 8 steps here. Step is probably the worst word here. It's really just kind of discrete actions by the user. But it turns out that this step 2 was when they went to their email. And so you can see this is the biggest drop across all of the steps here. And so we lose 25% of the users off the bat. And so that seems bad. And so it's kind of a good idea, this product feature, where why don't we address the 25% right off the bat and see if we can help make that a little bit better? Right. And so the last piece of information, which is probably secondary, but it is important to note, is that it turns out that, at least for Yammer, about half of our users or half of our invites that occur on the network actually come from the sign-up flow. So this turns out to be the place where virality really occurs. And so you get bonus points, not just for if you improve the sign-up flow for organic users, you don't just get more of those users. You might also get more users on top of that, because those people come in and then they tell their friends and then they tell their friends. And so there's this viral effect that occurs afterwards.
Okay. So why is it worth investing all this time justifying a feature when it seemed like such a good idea to begin with? Well, in Yammer's product process, we have a meeting called, we have a couple of meetings where this information would come up, product review and the product prioritization meeting. The product prioritization meeting is the easiest one to explain here because what I'm going to need to do as a product manager is take all the research that that the project team has done, Ken's analytical research, and then maybe some user research surveys that we do if we feel it's necessary for the feature. And I'm going to bring that to a meeting where other PMs show up with their features that they have similarly attempted to justify. And then we're going to try to prioritize them against each other using some of those initial 3 prioritization options that I talked about. So strategy helps a lot. And I think we're releasing another poll. So progress toward a strategic feature helps a lot. But if you come in with hard data and you show exactly how impactful the feature is going to be, then you're gonna then it gives the leadership more information to use to make an objective decision about which features to work on first. So an example that might come up is I could be working on a sign up flow feature that addresses organic users like this one, and those have higher retention than viral users. They send more invites than viral users. And there are other benefits to them as well. So another PM might come in with a sign up flow feature that affects only viral users, and I would be able to say, well, that might be a good idea, but my sign up flow feature is affecting organic users, and if we can optimize organic users, we're just going to get more bang for our buck. Okay, so that was an example about how to justify a feature using metrics. And now we're going to skip to how to determine the success of a feature that you ship using metrics. Okay, so before we get into this, you can't judge the success of a feature unless you have a hypothesis for that feature. So when you make a hypothesis, I find it's useful to structure it in a way using like a discipline like if-then statement. So in the case of this feature, the hypothesis that we came up with was if we move the email confirmation step to the end of the sign-up flow, then more users will make it through the sign-up flow and more users will be retained. Even if your feature is large and it has multiple hypotheses, there should be one hypothesis that all the other hypotheses link up to. And I can't stress enough, especially if you're doing A/B testing, to actually make the hypothesis before you launch the A/B test, because otherwise you'll be tempted to kind of change the hypothesis to fit the results when you should be just like looking at the hypothesis, looking at the results, and trying to figure out why there's a delta.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The reason why the hypothesis is important is because then you know exactly what you're trying to measure. Because then otherwise you could just create a metric that just fits what you want it to say. And so in order to combat that, you should have a hypothesis, and it should flow pretty naturally from that, what it is that you're supposed to measure.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, okay, we shipped this feature. We're feeling really good because we have all this justification, and we have these previous results of a similar sign-up flow test that we learned from. So now Ken's going to jump in and analyze the results of this A/B test.
Right. Okay. So we had 2 experiences here. And so we gave half the people an experience which was exactly the same as before, which is the 4 steps. And then we had one which was reordered, which is essentially the steps 2, 3, and 4 were moved up, and then the step 1, which is the email confirmation step, was moved to the back. And then, so the first thing I looked at was, okay, so how many people actually activated their account, right? So we have a 2-step activation. What percentage of the users in each of the groups actually did that thing? It turns out that fewer people actually activated in the reordered version of the test. With a p-value of basically 0. So it wasn't actually this many zeros, but it was pretty close to this many zeros. And so you can see that there are essentially 6 out of every 100. We lost 6 out of every 100 users compared to what existed before, which already seems pretty bad. Like we didn't think we'd lose that many users, but it turns out that we did. Okay, cool. And so the second thing is we have a measure of retention here. And so we have this metric called days engaged, which this is a completely different talk in itself, but we counted how many days people used the product. So if they used it Monday, April, or it's Friday, right? April 10th. It's April 10th then. Dang it. Okay, so it's April 10th. And so if we counted people that used it April 10th and 11th, that would count as 2 days here. And so we use this metric because it turns out that this metric correlates really, really highly with whether or not people stick around some really long time frame out. So for us, it's 3 months. And so, we do this count as a proxy metric for long-term retention. And it turns out here that on average, users engaged less with the new experience as well. And so the average user engaged about 2.6 days, whereas in the normal experience, it was 2.8. And again, this p-value, which again is a measure of uncertainty, is basically close to zero, which means this is probably a real difference in what happened.
Great. Yeah. So I'm just going to jump in and talk about days engaged a little bit more because it's a very convenient metric for us, for the product management team at Yammer. So as Ken mentioned, our top priority is to get users to come in and use Yammer and then continue to use it in the long term. Because we think that in order to create a good and valuable enterprise social product, you need to have users that come in and use it as a primary communication tool. That was, spelled out in the slide that had that bullet about our vision. But it's very inconvenient product-wise to run an A/B test for 3 months to see how many users you were able to retain for 3 months based on the feature that you launched. If we were to run tests that were 3 months long every time, then our engineering velocity would slow to a crawl. We would be learning just as much, just at a much slower rate than we would like to. And one of the things that our engineers like is the higher velocity, the better when they're developing features.
Right.
So,
one more thing about days engaged is it seems like a really stupid metric. But I think we like stupid metrics because they're easy to explain. We could create some sort of really crazy score using some fancy machine learning and regressions and all this stuff, but it'd be really hard to explain to someone else what all that means. But having a metric like days engaged, it's very, very easy to understand and kind of parse that and say, okay, well, and translate that to a human experience, right? And so if we did something more complicated, we sort of lose that feel that data really is about people, not necessarily just numbers.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I think there's another poll coming out related to days engaged.
Okay, so just to clarify, we hadn't done an earlier poll, so I apologize. Because it needs to launch. Okay. So I just launched the poll. It's a question for the participants. If days engaged had gone up instead of down, do you think we should have shipped this feature? It's very easy. Vote yes or no. And I'll give you some of the stats as they're coming in. We're at 88% have said yes. But only 51% of the vote has come in.
Okay. Shouldn't give it away.
Okay. Yes is winning. I don't want to sway the voters. Okay. I'm waiting for a few more votes are still coming in. We're coming up on a minute. Get your votes in before I shut down the poll. Okay. I am shutting down the poll. And the results are that 82% said yes. They would have shipped the feature if days engaged had gone up instead of down, and 18% said no.
Okay. Well,
So the yeses
I
had
think the
it.
better answer is yes. Although, Ken, is there any scenario where we would get like higher days engaged, but the activation rate would, if there was a large drop in activation rate, we would end up with less engaged users? Because it might actually be more complicated than yes or no.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, like, it depends on what you care about. Like, let's go with your scenario first. So, there could be a case where days engaged goes up, but our activation rate goes down. And so, one way you can interpret that is that you have better users in the end because, so you have fewer users, but they end up engaging more days, which might not be a bad thing. It really depends on what you're trying to optimize for, right? And so if you want like higher quality users, that might not be a bad thing to do. It really comes down to vision. Like, what is it that you really care about?
Yeah, good users are more users.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of A/B test results are even less are less clear than these were, and these are the types of conversations that we have all the time. Just talking about A/B test results, trying to measure the trade-offs of, we got more users but they're not as good, or we got more new users but we lost existing users. That's a common trade-off that we look at, and it just takes a discussion a lot of times to figure out what the right decision is.
Right. And so getting back to the results that we saw, we have the data, but it's not necessarily clear from the data what it all means. And so we have to hypothesize about the results themselves. And so the hypothesis here was that users saw, so it's true that the users saw steps in a different order, but they dropped off in similar but actually worse percentages because it turns out that because you moved the step of going to your email to the end, you end up adding more friction because you had them do a bunch of stuff that they might not necessarily wanted to have done, right? Like, and so we moved the call to action to actually do the thing that we cared about, which is getting them to activate toward the end, which meant we put more distance between them activating and becoming a user where we can then, talk to them in various ways and email them. And we just put more friction in their way. And so because of that, fewer users activated via email. And because we had fewer users that activated, that snowballed into we had less days engaged on average because, fewer users also means fewer days possible that the entire group of users could engage.
Okay, so why did we choose this example? It may seem like a strange idea to choose two losses in a row as our example of data-informed product management, but if you think about it, if you don't use data to determine the success of your features, then you're just going to ship everything. You could maybe think of something else like user surveys to determine the success of your features. But as soon as you instrument all of your data and you start using rigorous data processes or rigorously put data into your product processes, what you're going to find is that a lot of features you want to do are not you can't justify them, and a lot of features that you thought were going to be great have negative or even flat results. And another kind of just aside is, in our philosophy, we don't want to add new technical complexity to our product unless we have a good reason, and usually the good reason is because it moved up core metrics. So if we ship a complex feature, like a new chat widget or something like that in our product, and it doesn't move days engaged or at least retention or some other metric that's correlated with long-term retention up, then we'll if the results are flat, then we'll also kill that feature and not release it to 100% and take it back or iterate on it, or just try a different way to engage our users.
Yeah, I think the point of data is not necessarily to ship features, right? It's about learning something so that we can make better decisions, right? And so I'm probably getting ahead of us in the slides, but it's not just about. I have no idea where I'm going. Oh yeah, yeah. So let's just go to data driven versus data informed.
Okay, talk about that.
Yeah. So data is an input to a decision. It's not the output, right? And so you could imagine a scenario where because one of the lifts were higher, therefore I will immediately ship. You could do that. But the problem is, data's not perfect, right? We're using proxy metrics to gauge the success of something. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the data is 100% correct. All we want to do is make sure that we're using data to help minimize any uncertainty we have about what it is that we're doing. And so that's really the point, is to help Neil have more confidence in the decisions that he's making.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about like getting set up to be data informed?
Right. And so one of the kind of gotchas that we sort of completely ignored was you have to have an infrastructure that supports data collection. And so you got to log a lot of your data because if you can't log data, you can't really do analysis, you can't measure anything. And so, we have a really awesome infrastructure of data logging and data infrastructure and a team of data analytics that do basically reporting. And so we have all that in place that allows us to do these sorts of things. The second thing I want to mention here is, for us, days engaged and this 1 day and 7 day retention as metrics worked for us, but that might not necessarily work for your company. Every product is different. And in fact, for us, every feature is different. So sometimes we have different metrics for different pieces of the product. But you got to choose your own metrics. And so, for us, days engaged is a metric that we use globally because we think it's good. It's a good proxy for long-term usage. But you got to choose metrics that make sense for you. And so for us, we do the math and we found out that this makes sense for us. But it's something that we test over and over again.
Yeah, and just as a follow-on to that, engagement and long-term retention are very, very important for communication products. But if you're building a CRM, if a person can go in and get their job done more quickly, then that's probably closer to helping you identify your core metric than trying to get them to stick around for a long time or engage a lot of times per day. Moving on to some of the bottom two bullet points, build your processes around data. So we mentioned how we use data to justify our features. We mentioned how we use data to determine the success of our features. If the expectation that you're going to bring data to the table and use data in these ways is not ingrained in your product process, then you're probably not going to do it, and you're not going to get value out of all the work that you did logging your data, choosing your metrics, and designing your collection system. So you have to change your mental model kind of parts of what being a product manager is to just build in that expectation of how you're going to use data. So then a question that we've gotten when we've given this talk is how much PMs should know about statistics. It's kind of a trick question because either the analytics team that we have or the tools that they use kind of do a lot of the hardcore math for us. It's much more important. You need to understand statistical concepts like p-value, the main ones, but it's much more important to think in terms of impact and think in terms of what you can learn, because that's going to help you make the most out of your data resources, whether it be the people or the data that you have access to. And it's going to help you work together with your data scientists so you can both be speaking the same language, and you'll at least be able to understand the data scientists or data analysts' priorities so that when you're going along with those priorities, you know what that means, and when you're kind of contradicting their priorities by invoking some more fuzzy concept like strategy or vision or something that okay, we're going against the data, but you're doing it purposefully. Because you do need to go against the data sometimes, and if you don't, you'll just be simply data-driven rather than data-informed.
Right. I'll add one more thing. So all those things I think are the most important. So you should probably know a little bit about p-values just to understand what uncertainty means in terms of data. The other thing I think is important to know, and it's not necessarily about statistics, but more just about how data works, and that's about bias. And so it's good to understand where data can lie to you. And so having a good sense of where bias exists. So sometimes bias exists in how you collect the data. There are temporal biases that occur. So, obviously a typical example is, I released feature A and then all of a sudden my new users went up. Therefore, feature A caused my new users to go up. And so that's a bias that's not necessarily true. It could be true. But understanding where the data looks good but might not actually look the way you think it is or work the way you think it is also kind of like a really cool skill to have. And so I think that's probably even more important than understanding what a p-value is.
Yeah, something Ken just occurred to me. You brought it up yesterday as something that you wanted me or you to talk about around this point was thinking in terms of impact and also thinking in terms of uncertainty, because since p-value it's a measure of uncertainty, you can kind of set a benchmark feature by feature and metric by metric of what's an acceptable p-value. But as a PM and as an analyst looking at real world data, you need to look at trends, not just simply default to p-value and be okay with the fact that there's going to be some uncertainty associated with the results that you're looking at, and thus you're going to have to make some logical leaps when you're building the story that explains the results, which is an important part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we get into the nitty gritty, we're pretty relaxed with our thresholds for p-values, and it's more because we make this trade-off. So the thing about Yammer is that we try to move fast and iterate really fast, and we have these 2 to 10 week cycles. And so you don't want to be running an experiment for 2 months, right? We want to be running very, very short experiments so that we can learn fast and then just go on to the next thing. And so part of that is that, statistics requires large sample sizes to be really robust and to really have good certainty. Sorry. And so, there's this inherent trade-off between speed and certainty. And so that also manifests itself in, how we collect data and how we interpret the data too.
Yep. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining us today. That's the end of our presentation, and now we're ready to take Q&A.
Great. So there's been a lot of great questions coming in as you were speaking. So let's start with, can you speak to whether or not validation bias plays a role in Yammer's PM function?
So let's define validation bias.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
And so I think what validation bias means, and then please correct me if I'm wrong, is we create a feature and log things such that we can, if we know the metrics ahead of the time, we can sort of make it such that whatever that we do actually creates the metric that we want in the direction that we want.
Well, do we have a problem? I guess one of the problems that we've had in the past as PMs is we go into the query tools that we have without an analyst sometimes, which they don't like when we do that. And we look at every metric that we can find. When it's actually better when you think about a feature to only look at the metrics that you think could possibly be moved by that feature. Because then you're kind of eliminating some of the uncertainty that surrounds data by just not looking at the data that's likely to not have been moved by the feature, but that may show you an randomness-based result. So an example that we use is we have a metric called invites. So if we launch a feature, then the treatment group might send thousands more invites than the control group. But if we're launching a feature that's not related to invites, then we just won't look at that invites metrics. It's already a really noisy metric, and so it's hard enough to trust when we're doing an invite-based feature. And so that's how we it's kind of the opposite of validation bias, I guess. It's uncertainty elimination.
Yeah. Okay, so that might actually be what validation bias means
to
this person. But I think we did have this problem at some point.
We embrace validation bias, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is why the point about the strong hypothesis is important, because I remember there was a time where, we basically had a dim sum menu of metrics, and then we had sometimes PMs would just choose the metrics. It's oh, that one is up.
Yeah.
So therefore we should ship this product. And so that does happen, but the way we get around that is, number one, strong hypothesis, and then number two, we have these core metrics that we care about. So we only have 3 or 4 metrics that people we tell people you should look at these, and then the rest of them are explanatory and considered second class metrics, whereas we care about those 4 or 5 core metrics more.
Great. So there's been a lot of questions about tools. What kinds of tools? Does Yammer use any specific analytical tools in order to help its decisions? Or does the in-house analytical team handle that?
Well, this is really convenient. So I actually act as product manager for our internal analytics tool. So no, we don't use anything third party, but we create everything on our own. We have a team of engineers that create our own query tool in the way that we believe works. It's pretty cool. It does a lot of stuff that we care about, which is visualization, very simple counting of data, and it connects to a bunch of different data sources, not just within Yammer, but also amongst the Microsoft ecosystem.
Yeah, and we're able to justify that because we just really went all in on being data informed pretty early on in Yammer's history, and thus we have a couple dozen maybe people, either data scientists or data engineers that maintain and upgrade that system. So it's a big investment, but we chose to make it because we believed it was the right way to do product.
I could talk about that for hours, but
Okay, let's schedule. Tools of the trade are very important. We can schedule another webinar to discuss that. So people really want access to that in-house data tool. So we're now talking about having another webinar specifically about tools. So this is a question relevant for AI PMM people. What do you look for in entry-level PM candidates? If you want to speak briefly, how did you get into doing product management at Yammer, and what is Yammer's criteria?
Sure. So our criteria changes based on the the experience level of the candidate that's coming in. We expect more from more senior candidates, of course. When we interview, I would say we often ask about products that the person's using in their personal life or at work, and then we'll have them design a feature for that, just to see how they think about product and how they can apply justification, metrics for success, etc. And the holy grail type of answer is when the candidate sets a goal for this feature, possibly before they even say what the feature is, validates the goal with the interviewer maybe, and then actually designs a feature that could accomplish that goal, and then chooses a way to determine the success of that feature that is related to the goal, and bonus points for setting a hypothesis. So just any kind of strength in those areas, very objective reasoning, logical connections between the goal, the feature, and the way to measure its success. So that's what we look for when the product management team is interviewing a product manager. And we also have our analytics team and some other teams interview each PM candidate. And Ken can probably talk about what he looks for when he's interviewing PM candidates.
Yeah. So I actually just put them through the same interview that we put our analytics team through. But I don't expect them to know nearly as much, hardcore statistics stuff. But, I just want to see if they're good problem solvers, really. And, it's okay if you don't necessarily know everything, but I really like candidates that sort of plow their way through a problem. And so it could get messy, but, if they have the tenacity to get through it, and if they have kind of the common sense in terms of understanding what good means and how you define good, that's basically all I look for. Excellent.
Does revenue ever come into the picture as a metric for PMs?
Yeah, so I would say that it doesn't come that way for PMs, but in terms of our analytics, we do think about it. But I think it's kind of hard for Yammer the product because there is a little bit of a weirdness in terms of our business model and how revenue maps to users, because users aren't the ones that pay. I know in my previous companies that revenue tended to be a bigger driver because the link between usage and buying was a little bit more direct. So I would say that in general, yes, it's not a bad idea to use revenue in your product management or in your product prioritization, but it's sort of context dependent.
Yeah, and From the product management side, the short answer is no. We don't use monetization as a core metric for the reasons that Ken mentioned. We have an enterprise sales force. They close deals. If they need a feature in order to close a deal, then that's sort of as close to a monetization feature, so to speak, as we'll build. But we're still going to take those features through the same rigorous like justification and success metrics process that we went through in this presentation.
Right. And so like the same rigor that we applied to figure out that days engaged was a good metric for us, we could also do that exact same thing for revenue. But it turns out that data is messier, and it's just we just know that it's not worth the trouble.
And so there were a lot of questions and comments having to do with the core metrics. Mm-hmm. Were those handed to you? Are those, aligned with the business case, or were those arrived at before you?
I mean, they are arrived at before me, but it's something that we test over and over again, right? And so, what hasn't changed is what we care about, right? What we care about is that people stick around however long from now. You could say 3 months, you could say a year, and then we use data and we use math to figure out what are the correlations that we can. And so essentially, all we're trying to do for a core metric is find a metric that we can measure in 2 weeks that relates to what users would do in a year, right? And so that's all we're trying to do. And so for us, we test this all the time, and I think it's automated actually. And so we could test if this core metric is no longer a core metric, which could entirely happen if your product does change in really drastic ways.
Excellent. So let's move on. We'll have a couple of more slides. So there's a few other questions. People are very specific. There was background reading. The slides will be available on the AIPMM site along with the background reading. And do you have there's more info, and also there's a quiz. Right, that's part of the background reading. There was the quiz on data-informed product management. It's out on Medium, and it's on the slide here, the URL. And also there was the case study example. Is this a new one, this quiz? Is this addition? Is this a third piece?
That's the same one.
Okay, that's included in the Bitleys. So I just want to move on and tell you about some upcoming trainings from the AIPMM. These are certification trainings. They happen worldwide. There's some local ones. I can see it now on my screen. I apologize. Coming up in Seattle and McLean, there's a certification prep course for the CPM, which is a Certified Product Manager, as well as the Certified Product Marketing Manager and the Agile Certified Product Manager. I hold the CPM and CPMM. These are very good intensive courses, and the tests are also very good, testing your knowledge. The more experience you have, the more you grasp the material, but I think they're relevant for people at all stages of your career because it's giving you a lexicon of product management language. Okay, so for more information, follow the URL, go to the AIPMM website, aipmm.com. Is there another? Okay, as I said, they happen worldwide, also in Athens, Greece, Belgrade, Serbia. Both of these they're also localized for the business environment there. Okay. Keep going. Oh, as well as a certified innovation leader. Also a training I've been through, which is excellent, and it gives you a full overview. So next week, come back for what your product needs to know a data and analytics strategy. So AIPMM seems to be on an analytics theme for the next couple of weeks, and how software analytics can improve your products. And join me weekly on the Global Product Management Talk. It's Wednesdays, 10 a.m. In Pacific time. We broadcast live out of Studio 132. And here's some more URLs to follow to get involved with AIPMM and forward your career. And now it is time for the drawing for the Product Management Body of Knowledge. That is a 320-page volume of 60 contributors talking about product management from inception to sunsetting of the product. And the drum roll while I reach into the hat. And the winner is Jason Matthew. Congratulations, Jason Matthew. We will send you an email to get more information to send you the book. And great. Thank you again to Ken and Neil for joining me and for putting this together here in the studio. And I invite you to come back and give some more presentations, as well as for the questions that we didn't get to. I will pass them to you offline if you want to answer them and continue the conversation further. And definitely follow both Jason and Neil on Twitter. And this is Cindy Faye Solomon. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to the AIPMM and to BZ Lewis, our sound engineer. Have a great week.
I took a breathing this morning. It hurts, but still at least there's pain. My feet were flying off the pavement. I turned down Fillmore Street again. I think I'm on to something, baby. You can't tell me I'm not changed. The woolen blankets won't console me. Turn down Fillmore Street again. Feel more, feel more. Water. I'm a mudslide coming down.